Australia's business channel. The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.
Good evening and welcome to the property edition of Your Money, Your Call. It's great to have you back for another week of property information. I'm Margaret Lomas, and first to the news, and conditions in the established housing market remain strong, according to latest meeting minutes from the Reserve Bank of Australia. They say that while house price inflation across the country in 2014 hasn't been as rapid as over the second half of 2013, it has remained robust. Auction clearance rates in Sydney have eased from their high levels in late 2013, although they have increased in Melbourne more recently. RBA also observed that residential dwelling approvals had declined somewhat in recent months, but remained at a high level, and in combination with the substantial amount of residential work yet to be done, suggested that dwelling investment was likely to remain strong in the period ahead. And 1 in 3 first home buyers is given a deposit by their parents to purchase property, in a trend that lenders say is booming. Mums and dads are collectively paying out $122 million a year to shoehorn their children into home ownership, with at least a third of first-time buyers spared the financial difficulty of saving for a full deposit. And a whopping 80% are given some form of financial assistance by their parents to buy real estate, whether it's a deposit, interest-free loan or acting as a guarantor, according to the lender research. With house prices rising at about 10% a year, lending criteria tightening since the GFC, and investors pushing first-time buyers out of the market, more parents are willing to stump up a deposit. Tonight, we'll not only discuss these stories, but as always, answer your questions. And helping me this evening is Brad Matthews from Rescom and Ben Kingsley from Empower Wealth. So if you do have a question for anyone on the panel this evening, you should get in nice and early by either calling us right now on 1330 34 35 or by emailing it to me at property@skynews.com.au. Thanks for being here, and let's get started. Welcome to you both.
Good evening, Margaret.
Brad, the RBA minutes reflect that the market is still going fairly well, and while they're expecting it to peg back a little, they're saying that Melbourne's started to show a little bit of sign of movement at the moment. You're from Melbourne. Are you seeing it happening on the ground?
Yeah. Pretty much everywhere where you're looking at the moment, there's activity again. I think it's off the back of Melbourne slowed down. It took a breather. It slowed down for 6 to 12 months. And if you look back historically, it was continuing just a 5, 6, 7% increase, 5, 6, 7% increase, quarterly figures. And then all of a sudden you look at it annually and you're up around 10, 12%. It did that for a couple of years. So, naturally, it has to slow down.
What is it about you guys down there that you can't just sort of do things in sync with the rest of the country? You know, we came out of the global financial crisis and everything just stagnated except Melbourne. They kept going. And then, of course, when everyone else picked up, Melbourne had to stagnate. Now it looks like certainly Sydney at least and Perth are on the cusp of more stagnation. Melbourne's decided they're going to go now.
Yeah. I think it's counter-cyclical. As everywhere else around the country does one thing, we actually go the other way.
Yeah. Ben, do you guys just think that you're better than the rest of the country?
Oh, look, I'm not going to answer that, but I can say that sentiment down there has been pretty strong. The economy's been reasonably robust over the last 8 to 10 years, whereas Sydney did suffer from, a stagnant economy. We're going to face some challenges now. We've got an election coming up at the end of this year, and unemployment's on the rise. So maybe, Melbourne might have had, its time in the sun, and it's now time for somebody else to take that limelight.
So you're thinking that the recent, upgrade of activity is only going to be short-lived. You're not picking it to remain?
Look, I'm saying that, and just look at auction clearance rates this time last year, 79% clearance rate on roughly the same numbers. This weekend, only 71%. So we are getting into a lead up into the spring season, the selling season, but there's only 13 weeks before we, celebrate the festive season from an auction point of view in Melbourne. So that's, there's a fair bit of lead time, but I suspect we're going to see certainly volumes increase. But we've had record auction clearance rates and record numbers of sales during our winter season, which is normally our hiatus down there because it has been a cold winter, hasn't it, Brad?
It always is.
Yeah, well, nothing new about that in Melbourne. Now, look, I want to come back to the story about giving kids a leg up into the market, but first let's go to the email, and we have tonight a question that we've never been asked before. It's from Desmond, who asks, I recently discovered that I could insure my investment properties for a lower premium by insuring them for its mortgage value. The properties are always below LVR of 80%, and I never want to rebuild if the property is ever destroyed. In case the property is destroyed, I'll use the insurance payment to pay the bank, clear the land, and then sell the land. Do you see any problems with this? Your expert advice is very much appreciated. Brad, I see some little problems with this. I don't know if you're seeing the same problem that I'm seeing, but maybe you can sort of fill us in on what you see.
Look, Desmond, none of us here on the panel are insurance experts, right? So we'll preface it with that first. But the issue would be, in the event that there is a fire claim, firstly, you do have to clear the site of demolition. Secondly is, you're assuming that the fire or the damage actually damages the whole property. What if it only burns down 1/3 of it? Right? You'll then have an issue with the insurance company because they will say that you're underinsured. They have no interest whatsoever in your mortgage. Right? Whether you can service a loan, whether you can't service a loan, their interest is they're insuring the risk of damage to the property. So in the event that it does burn down and you've underinsured the property, they'll say, well, that's okay, Desmond. We've actually got to insure the part of the house that hasn't burnt down. All right? That's how they'll look at it.
Yes.
All right?
And look, it's true, isn't it, Ben, that if you were to insure your house for, say, 70% of its value, the insurance company reserves the rights to then only pay 70% of any claim.
Correct. Some insurance companies do operate in that manner. Now, remembering he's trying to just insure the land. Now, I'd be saying that, if you've got a replacement value insurance policy, why would you not you could get upside in the actual resale. Plus, you've got a brand new asset sitting on that land that makes it attractive. Now, we don't know where this is in terms of, it could be located in Timbuktu, who knows, and maybe there's no need for accommodation out there. But the relative point from there, for a small premium, let's call it $500, $600 a year, which is an average premium, tax deductible, why would you take a short, narrow-minded view? And the clearing of the asset that could still be standing could cost $20,000 to actually remove and clear the land for sale. Doesn't quite make sense. I think it's penny pinching without seeing that the insurance is actually an asset.
And look, the panel's exactly right, Desmond. The difference between you insuring you for your mortgage value, which is 80% of the value, and the value of the actual property itself is probably not going to be that great in terms of increased premium. And it's a tax deduction anyway, so every dollar extra that you pay, you can claim up to 45% of that as a tax deduction anyway. And so you could have a host of problems when the time comes. As Brad's pointed out, it might only burn down a portion of that property or cause smoke damage that needs to be repaired. And if you're underinsured, the insurance company may refuse to pay the claim for you. So there's a lot of issues around what you think you might want to do. And besides which, you say you'd only want to clear off the block and then sell the land. But what if the property had been fabulous, it was growing really well, you had tenants all the time, you got it to the point where you were making a fabulous positive cash flow from the property, you might well want to build again so you can continue to have that great return. And when you build again, you'll get a whole host of extra tax deductions all over again, like all the depreciation being a brand new building, which will improve your cash flows even more and make the upside of building again rather than clearing and selling far greater than you can ever imagine it to be. So, yeah, doesn't sound like the right time to be penny pinching right now. Insurance is a cost of investing. You need to be insured for the full value. And one last thing that I just thought of, the bank will, in their valuation, tell you how much you need to insure the building for anyway. And if you don't insure the building for that amount, you could be in breach of your mortgage agreement with them too. So you may not actually have the choice of how much you want to insure for. I always love having everyone on board Monday nights, so thank you for being with us here as usual. Now we're continuing with our question of the week this week, and this is your chance to get hold of a copy of one of my books. Every Monday night the panel and I choose a viewer question, and we send a copy of one of my books. This week the chosen question will receive 20 must-ask questions for every property investor. If you're ready to buy this book, we'll make sure that you ask the right questions to uncover the growth drivers. Just call us now on 1300 30 34 35 or email property@skynews.com.au with the question, and then make sure that you watch at the end of the show to see if you're chosen. Now, as soon as we've covered these next messages, we'll be back, so don't go away. I'm so glad that you stayed with us because we have a great show lined up. Answering your questions tonight is Brad Matthews from Rescom and Ben Kingsley from Empower Wealth. Now, if you have a question about property, grab your phone and call us on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Raj from Melbourne, welcome to the program, Raj.
Thanks, Margaret, for taking my call, and hello to the panel.
The Melbourne panel, as it turns out.
Yep. Absolutely. And just have a question on a couple of locations. One is Dubbo and another one is Blackstone. I bought a house in both of these places almost pretty close to 18 months back. Dubbo has pretty much grown 30% more than the time I bought in, and Blackstone has been flat. In fact, I haven't lost any money over there, but it's been flat because I bought it when the market was down. How do you guys see both these locations perform mid to long term?
Okay, who wants to comment? You're both looking at me with horror on your face. Are you okay to go, Ben?
Look, Gladstone's going to have some...
It's actually Blackstone.
Blackstone or Gladstone?
Did you say Blackstone or Gladstone, Raj?
Sorry, Gladstone in Queensland.
Blackstone, yes.
Blackstone.
Yes.
No, if it's Blackstone, it's not on my radar.
Okay, well, you can comment on Dubbo then?
Look, I can make a general comment about Dubbo, and that is that historically, longer term, it's been pretty good, Raj, and you know, you've obviously enjoyed some movement. So I'm having a little bit of trouble in hearing what you said, but I think I caught that it's grown around 30% since the time that you've held it. So the yields are holding in Dubbo. The supply side of the conversation in Dubbo is still fairly well balanced, and generally, you know, it's a hub of that region. And as Margaret would always point out to you, those types of areas that have diversified industry, not just relying on the rural, you know, sort of farming industry, those types of things are going to do well for you in the Dubbo region. So it's a slow burn, but it's a predictable one.
Yeah, look, Dubbo is an area that has a little bit of mining influence, so that's what's been kicking it along at the moment. I think 30% has been very, very good for you. You must have bought very well, and I don't think you're going to see a big boost like that again, but I think your rentals will keep being quite good, and it'll kind of, yeah, as Ben said, it'll just potter along. Blackstone is near Ipswich, and it's probably got better chance of growing in the future. I know it's been flat for a while, and Ipswich sort of came off the boil for a little while, but it's part of that entire corridor from Brisbane all the way down through the southern suburbs or the coastal suburbs there, through Logan and into Ipswich, and it's now going to start to come into its own from here on in. We're starting to see shrinking land supply. We're seeing improved transport infrastructure into that area, and if we go through Ipswich and up into Toowoomba, we're starting to see a lot happening up in that area, which will roll back through those suburbs like Blackstone and a few of those other areas to ensure that you get pretty good growth in Queensland. I certainly wouldn't be selling Blackstone anytime soon. Chris from Melbourne, you're also from Melbourne. What is it about Melbourne tonight?
Yes, it's running hot.
It is. What can we do for you, Chris?
I'm a first-time investor, and I bought a property 2 years ago in Mackay off the plan, and I've just got evaluated, and it's come in under.
Yes.
and I just heard it was just running a bit flat.
Yes.
I was just wondering how long until that actually picks up a bit.
All right. Well, look, we don't exactly have a crystal ball here, but what can you say, Brad, about Mackay?
Not so much more about Mackay, but actually buying off the plan, I think. You've always got to be looking at what is it that you're actually buying. When you look at buying off the plan, is there 6 units or townhouses, or is there 150 apartments in what you're buying? So many things can happen between the date you sign the contract and, you know, literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent marketing that project that you're buying off the plan and the actual completion date. And that may be what has happened here. Looking at regional places, I'm not a big fan of buying in larger developments off the plan, usually looking for freehold land, the sort of things that people would buy there locally rather than investors out of market.
Good advice there. And Ben, what do you say?
Yeah, look, I was talking to an accountant, a very smart person who's also bought some land up in Mackay, and that's he's planning to build now. His value of his land's dropped around 20%. Chris, the challenge with Mackay at the moment is there is an oversupply issue. So the market's cooked itself to a point where the underlying or the time lag that happens when the planning approvals come through, when the economic boom time's happening and there's a shortage of accommodation and shortage of stock, now we're actually seeing how long it takes for that planning approval to happen. They've all come in and now it's come to roost that we're seeing an oversupply. So there's real choice for renters, and the economic activity in that area with coal, steam, gas and with general coal activity is softened off a little bit. So unfortunately Mackay and Gladstone are in that sort of camp where it could be a very slow burn.
Yeah, look, and Chris, I think you got the double whammy here in that you not only bought off the plan, which is likely to mean that you may well have paid over the true intrinsic market value. That's typically how we're seeing many off-the-plan apartments or properties turn out. And you may, I don't know whether you said you bought an apartment or whether it was an off-the-plan house and land package, but typically, particularly when they're sold to out-of-towners in this way, the research isn't done properly into real market value, and typically people are quite taken away by the glossy brochures and all the information contained therein to say what a wonderful property this is going to be, and we pay too much off the plan. Very difficult to work out market value when it's off the plan. So you had the double whammy of not only that, but also then most likely settling at a time when Mackay had really come off the boil. There was excitement around Mackay, which formerly only had tourism to its name, that the mining around Mackay would suddenly make it boom. Everyone seems to have this impression that mining equals fabulous improvement in value, but it can go both ways. And the problem with mining is that if you're investing in a town that has a mining influence, then you're no longer just investing in a property, you're also investing in an industry, and your investment will wax and wane according to how that industry waxes and wanes. In Mackay at the moment and around Mackay, the mining industry is down, and we can't say how long that's going to happen. The best thing is that if you are getting a rent return that's covering your costs, then stay in the market. If it's not impacting too negatively on you financially, stay in the market, because the flip side of that coin is it always comes back. We can't say when, but it always comes back at some time. And Mackay has a number of pretty good fundamentals anyway to help it come back. I think you really need to talk to somebody about your personal finances on this one to work out whether it's one to hold or one to get out of now while you can. We do have to take a few minutes for a couple of commercials, but when we come back, you could be in the running to get a copy of my book, The 20 Must-Ask Questions for Every Property Investor, if we read out your question and select you. Now, all you have to do is call in a question on 1300 30 34 35 or email property@skynews.com.au, and then stay tuned at the end of the show to see if you're the lucky person. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. Brad Matthews from Rescom and Ben Kingsley from Empower Wealth are doing a great job answering your questions. So if you have a question of your own maybe, or maybe just a comment to make, call us now on 1300 30 34 35 to join the queue, or you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. And Jagdeep from Sydney, how are you going?
I'm not too bad, and my regards to all of you in the panel.
Thank you. What can we do for you?
Hi, I have a couple of investment properties in Sydney, in addition to the one which I live in. I'm in the market for another one. Which suburbs should I invest in if I want to invest in, say, another unit?
Okay.
My budget is below 400,000.
Okay. Okay, I've got a couple of comments I'll make, but I'll let the panel go first. And Ben.
Thanks, Margaret. Throw me in the deep end. Thank you for your call. Look, around the Sydney market, I do like areas that are around that sort of those community hubs and also those transport nodes. And that's when I'm starting to look at the 2-bedroom apartments and 1-bedroom apartments around those nodes. Now, at that sort of price point, we're actually talking about areas that are in that sort of 20-kilometre range. So I'm sort of thinking areas around the Parramatta zones and some of those other areas. Now, I might even look at 1-bedroom and 1-bedroom apartments a little bit closer in. That's the sort of thing. But before I would give that type of full advice, I would need to understand the full circumstances. I mean, what are you buying it for? Are you buying it for yield, or are you buying it for growth, or are you buying it for a combination of the two? That's probably where I'll start.
Wouldn't you buy it for both? Who buys just for yield and not want growth?
Well, I'll give you an example, Margaret. If I've got a client that's got strong surpluses, then I'm going to chase really strong capital growth areas. So I'll go closer in and I'll be looking for those. If I've got a client who has a smaller surplus in terms of their household, or they're about to start a family or something like that, I'd actually need to focus on the yield content that I'm getting. And that's how I plan out strategy.
So my question was actually, all investors want both. You want good growth, you want good yield, and there's also no actual evidence that you have to go closer to the city to get better growth either. So I guess the question was, I can't imagine saying, I want to have a good cash flow but I don't care about growth, or I want to get good growth but I don't care about yield. I would imagine all investors want both.
Oh, of course, all investors want the best return they can get. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But if you're actually trying to plan out a retirement strategy for a client, I do look at those drivers and I look at the historical performance. And I know in terms of people say that past performance isn't an example, but I tend to say, look, 30 years, 35 years of performance, and I look at income growth in those areas. Now, the income growth that we see closer to the CBDs is a lot stronger, which gives us drive for more borrowing power, and there's obviously a pent-up demand, because what we're seeing closer in is the owner-occupiers are the ones who steer the marketplace. Now, when they steer the market, they buy on emotion, so they push the value higher in those areas. So from my point of view, I will go closer in when I'm looking for stronger, more reliable growth.
Okay, so I don't necessarily agree with that, but you understand that. And Brad, so what's your best advice for Jagdeep here?
For Jagdeep, what I would be looking at is more about what you stay away from than what you head for. Okay, so I don't know enough about your background, which is what Ben was alluding to, part of it there, but I would be more looking to steer away from medium to high density areas, which will always end up having an oversupply at some point in time. So you've got to look for something that's lower density, based on a $400,000 price bracket. I would be looking for older units in better suburbs. I'm not going to say what is the better suburb, but rather stay away from places where there is going to be high density, because you're going to be competing against those when you do go to market or sell at some point in the future.
Now, Jagdeep, I'm just going to throw a spanner in the works here as well and say that you worry me a little, because what you've done is you've called up and said you want to invest in Sydney, you want to buy a unit, and you want to spend $400,000, and they're the three decisions that you make toward the end of the investing process, not first. You shouldn't be driven by a price range, you shouldn't be driven by an area that you think you want to invest in, and you also shouldn't be driven by whether you're buying a unit or whether you're going to be buying a house. That can get you into a lot of trouble. The first thing we've got to be finding out for you is, where is the most opportune market at this moment in time? And that can be anywhere in Australia. Once we've discovered the most opportune market at that moment in time, the next thing we work out is whether or not it's in a price range that you can afford or whether it's out of your price range. If it's out of your price range, then you have to find the second most opportune market and go back and see if that's in your price range. Once you've worked out that the most opportune market is also in your price range, then you work out who is going to be renting this property off you to decide if you need to buy a unit or a house. Very often investors make the big mistake of thinking, I'll buy a unit because it's cheaper or it's a good first stepping stone, when a unit in the area you're about to buy might be the very worst thing that you could buy. Now, it could be that there is a great place in Sydney right at this moment in time that has units worth $400,000 just in your price range, and it's a good area to buy in. But until you do the research, you don't actually know that. So you need to take a step back and work out what's available in the country at the moment that looks like it's going to be the next area to grow, and then start to work out if you can afford it, whether it's a house or a unit that you need, who's going to live there, who's going to demand it in the future, and who's going to be your tenant in the meantime. Well, thanks for tuning in. We do need to take another break, but when we come back, we will come back. Meanwhile, why not jump on the phone for your chance to get hold of a copy of my book, The 20 Must-Ask Questions for Every Property Investor. Now, you'll have to ask a question, and you'll also have to have it selected by the panel. Call us now on 1300 30 34 35, or you can also email us on property@skynews.com.au. Welcome back to a great night on Your Money, Your Call with plenty of debate. I'm Margaret Lomas, and it's been my pleasure to have with me on the panel tonight Brad Matthews from Rescom and Ben Kingsley from Empower Wealth. Now, you can also have your question answered if you call us now on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Now, Trish wants to buy a property in Ellenbrook, and she asks, I recently received financial advice to purchase a unit in Ellenbrook, WA, off the plan for my self-managed super fund. I'm not sure about this venture, and I'm interested to know what you and the panel think. Ben, I'm a bit worried about getting financial advice to buy in a particular suburb and then in a super fund. I can smell a bit of a rat here.
I can too, Margaret. In terms of Trish, what I don't like about this is you've taken advice from a financial planner about property. One of the big things that we're about in terms of PIPA, which is the Property Investment Professional Association of Australia, which Margaret and I are board members of, is around qualification. I'm Brad, of course. I forgot Brad's on the panel as well. So what we're passionate about is making sure that people who give property investment advice are formally qualified to do so. They've undertaken some formal education to do that, and a lot of financial planners haven't done that. I'm concerned that this is one of their fixed solution that's off the shelf that they get and they present to you as this package solution around your self-managed super fund. So I'm glad that there is some radars and some concern coming up, and you're raising the question around whether this is the most appropriate thing to do. I'd be looking for independent property investment advice. If you've set up your self-managed super fund, that's great. Your financial planner is qualified to do that. But in terms of actually taking the advice on what's the best property to buy, I'd be talking to someone who's a QPIA, which is a qualified property investment advisor, and a member of PIPA.
And you know what, Brad? It might not just be, I mean, she may not have actually even gotten financial advice from a financial advisor. A lot of people mistake the advice they're getting and think it's financial advice. This could be just some guy who's got some properties to sell out in Ellenbrook, suggesting that she buys it in the self-managed super fund, and it looks like she's getting financial advice when she isn't, which is just as bad as the scenario Ben painted.
Yeah. What Ben has touched on there, Margaret, is bang on the money, because you're actually, whether you realise it or not, Trish, you've actually got two interdependent yet independent transactions you're doing here. Right? So over this side you have your self-managed super fund, and whether that is right or wrong for you, a qualified financial advisor will do that, and there is nothing wrong with self-managed super fund. Margaret has one. Ben has one, I have one. Nothing wrong with it whatsoever. So that's that side of there. But it doesn't suit everybody. Okay, but here's three of us on the panel here that do have them. Then the separate side of the transaction, which is independent yet interdependent based on what you're saying here, is the fact of buying an off-the-plan property. And then throw into the mix, is that the right property for your super fund? Okay, so there's a whole lot of things there which we're not, based on information we have, really qualified to give advice on. But there's a whole lot of things there that I would be, looking underneath the rock and seeing what's really happening there.
And so let me now talk about Ellenbrook, which is to the east of Perth itself. To get there, you go through lots of undeveloped land to get out to Ellenbrook. It's quite a lovely area. Do I think that it's going to skyrocket in value? Probably not. Do I think a unit is the right thing to buy there? Absolutely not, because Ellenbrook is very much a family area. I can't imagine where they would even put a unit, and I can't imagine the kind of people who would live in Ellenbrook and want a unit. If someone wants a unit in Perth, they're going to live somewhere a bit closer to the city. They're not going to live out in a family area where there are parks and ducks and play equipment and all the things that families want, and they're going to have a family, and so they're not going to want to live in a unit. So it could well be that the self-managed superannuation fund is right for you, and as Brad said many times, it isn't right for someone. It depends on how much money you've got in that self-managed super fund. But it's probably unlikely that this is the right property to be buying, whether it be in the self-managed super fund or whether you're buying it just for yourself to hold it personally. It worries me when people who only have small amounts of money in super are advised to put their money into super and buy property. ASIC's worried about it too, and they're developing laws against that at the moment. So I'd have another think about this, speak to someone independent, a qualified property investment advisor, and be very, very careful about this transaction. Peter from Melbourne. How are you going, Peter?
Good, thanks. Thanks for taking the call, Margaret. Margaret, the question is, when do you renovate an investment property? And when I say that is to get a return on that money. I've got a property and it's about late 1970s. It's dated, but not a dump, basically. And many people say don't renovate. You won't be able to add that much to the rent, and it's only going to get knocked about pretty quickly. So that's sort of, I'm just a bit lost as to where to go with that.
Well, Peter, I'm glad that you actually called about this, because then very often people want to jump in and renovate because it makes them feel better. And of course, these days, every second property expert is a renovate for profit expert, when in reality, you don't necessarily profit that well from renovations unless your property is also in a market that's going off on its own anyway.
You're right, Margaret, and thanks very much for your call, Peter. One of the interesting things, and this is a fairly easy question to answer for yourself. By that I mean if it's a 1970s property, we call those older style properties with laminate kitchens and so forth as reliable and durable. If they're reliable and durable, let them go. If you're getting feedback from your property manager saying that it's appealing enough that you'll get tenants into that particular property and get a good market rent and a good yield for that property, I wouldn't be spending any money on it. If you are thinking about renovating, then a great rule of thumb is $2 for a dollar. So every dollar you put in, you want to basically get a $2 return. So if you've got a budget of, say, $10,000 to do kitchen and bathroom, you want to add around $20,000 in value. Now, how you work that out is get some comparative properties of similar size in terms of number in the block, in terms of internal floor space, and do your comps. So basically look at the value of what those improved assets are compared to what you've got. Because there is definitely money to be made, Margaret, isn't there, in terms of doing those hands-on things. But, you know, like me, I'm a passive investor. I don't get hands-on, and a lot of my clients are passive investors as opposed to active investors, and they just let the asset do its thing, and then they just keep the maintenance on the property accordingly. So that's my feedback for you, Peter.
Brad, it also depends, I guess, on what else there is in the area. If you're the only unrenovated 1970s property in a whole suburb of newly renovated properties or brand new properties, and you're not getting a tenant because of it, you might want to renovate.
You could be sticking out like a sore thumb.
Yes.
There's a couple of things to not continue what Ben was saying, but along the lines of, Peter, you have to look and say, okay, two things that I would look at here. Am I going to affect my yield, the rent that I'm going to get, or am I going to affect my capital, or am I going to affect neither? I'm just plucking a figure because you didn't say what it was, where it is, and, you know, if I was to spend, you know, between $30,000 to $50,000 on doing a renovation, unless you're handy, that's what you're going to end up having to spend. You'll have to go external and outsource the work. Sometimes you look at that and say, okay, if I spend between $30,000 to $50,000, am I not better off using that $30,000 to $50,000 to buy another property instead? Because once you put that money in, you do not get it back until you either re-gear the loan back up again or you sell the property. Right, so if you're getting it back over yield, well then that goes onto the capital value of the property, so that you won't be able to get all the deduction. But if you've got $40,000 or $50,000 that you're going to use on a kitchen and a bathroom and painting and things like that, it will go backwards because the tenant will not look after it the way that you want it looked after. I would look at having $30,000 to $50,000 and buying another property somewhere.
Yeah, and that's a great way of looking at it. And I add to that by saying, if you need to borrow to do the renovation, work out the increased cost of the loan for that renovation, and then ask a property manager whether you'll see at least that amount back in improved rental return. It could be that you're going to all of this trouble just to give a tenant a better lifestyle on the same or similar rent, in which case maybe it's something you leave until such times as you do want to sell the property or have it revalued to borrow against again. If you're starting to get skinny on equity across all of your portfolio, you might want to touch up a few of your properties to try to get better values. But if you've got enough equity across a portfolio, and I don't know that I'd be spending money on a renovation unless I really knew that it was preventing me in some way from getting a good rent, or it was costing me good rent because it was an unrenovated property when many others were renovated. Well, we do have to stop here for a few minutes while you receive some important messages. When we return, you'll have another chance to ask your questions simply by calling us on 1300 30 34 35 or emailing us on property@skynews.com.au. It's good to see you still here with us. We're having a great night and getting some good questions too. Joining me on the panel tonight is Brad Matthews from Rescom and Ben Kingsley from Empower Wealth. Now, if you'd like to be in the running to get a copy of one of my books, call us now on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Luke from the Gold Coast. How are you going, Luke?
Oh, hi, Margaret. Very good, thanks. I just asked a question while I got the boys from Melbourne there. I bought a two-bedroom unit in Mordialloc earlier in the year, and I was just wondering what they thought of that. And if you have time, just quickly, your opinion of the Gold Coast. Thanks.
Okay, so let's go to you boys for Mordialloc. A lot of people are seeming to get quite interested in the area. Brad?
Nothing wrong with it whatsoever, Luke. It's the mortgage belt. Mixed between blue collar, white collar. It's near the water. It's near the freeways. It's got a nice little, what we call, a village atmosphere. Good area.
Eastern side of the city. It's the money belt. It's where the wave rider happens in terms of that, that disposable income, and if there's pressures internally in terms of getting into those blue chip areas, it naturally flows through. So, not a bad thing, Luke.
And you had something you wanted to add, Brad?
You've got to add, but the little caveat with the asterisk down the bottom, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've bought well, Luke. So I don't know, you're on the Gold Coast and it's apartments. So what I'm saying is there's lots of good housing down there, there's lots of good apartments, but I also know there's several developments down there. I'm not saying they're questionable, but dollar for dollar, you just got to make certain you're doing the right thing.
Look, there's very definitely in Melbourne a little bit of a demographic shift or a sentiment shift toward the east, as we're starting to see places like Narre and out through to Pakenham opening up for families and getting a big concentration. Then as we come back toward the city, those suburbs that are in between there are starting to really get gentrified, and they're starting to become more in demand by buyers and investors alike. So this is why we see places like Mordialloc suddenly come from being an area that people may have not favoured years ago to being the area that's starting to get quite trendy. The villagey atmosphere does help there, and I think it's an area, it's definitely one to watch. In terms of the Gold Coast, however, I know a lot of experts are calling the bottom of the market there and saying there's going to be a turnaround, and it may well be the bottom of the market, but that doesn't mean that you're going to see it heading up anytime soon. If you're talking about the Gold Coast itself, the Strip, Surfers, Broad Beach, then we still have a massive oversupply of property. We still have people discounting their properties incredibly to sell. We also have a great portion of the Gold Coast who are retirees who then pull a market down as well. You know, they sit in their properties and they eventually sell them, and they sell them randomly for whatever they can get for them. In terms of Gold Coast suburbs, some of those suburbs up toward Beenleigh, such as Mount Warren Park and the areas around there, bordering just on going out of the Gold Coast Shire and into the Beenleigh Shire, they're the areas that we're seeing most movement in at the moment. We're seeing them caught up in that whole Logan Shire group, and I think that that's going to be an area that moves first in the Gold Coast, more so than any of the units or anything else like that. Well, it's been a while since we've talked about defence housing, and tonight Cherry asks, I'd like to search for an investment property to buy, and I came across some properties offered by Defence Housing Australia. These properties are sold to investors under a leaseback arrangement. According to them, the investors benefit from a long-term lease, guaranteed rental income, restoration provisions at lease end, and other DHA property care services. What are your thoughts on that? Just quickly, Ben.
Certainly, Margaret. So, Cherie, in terms of this, let's go back to the fundamentals. Investment grade area, investment grade property. Just because the Defence Forces have a need for accommodation in that area, does that support the underlying demand in a location? And are we going to see price growth in that location? In terms of defence housing, they also load the management fees in terms of what you pay. So even though you might have the property refreshed after 9 or 12 years in terms of carpets and painting, you are paying a premium in terms of the ongoing management fees on that. So from me, I still want to see investment grade area, and I still want to see investment grade stock.
16%, I believe, or thereabouts, is what's being charged, which is some double what standard property management is. What do you think, Brad?
Cherry, it's one of those things, if you are the most passive of passive investors, it's something you can consider, okay? But other than that, you'll end up probably paying more than what a similar property is on the market for, because you are actually paying for their so-called expertise and the fact that you've got a 10-year contract. Now, bear in mind that it's a residential property. So when you do go to sell that property in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, you can only sell it to another investor because they've got a 10-year lease on it, which means that you probably won't attract the whole wide market. Okay, so Ben said earlier, owner-occupiers will always pay a premium because they're buying for emotion. You will end up selling an investment property, which doesn't necessarily mean it's worth what you've paid for it. Okay.
And here's the other thing, Cherry. You have to remember that defence housing, NRAS, rent guarantee, all they are is schemes of arrangement over the top of a property, and they can't impact on whether the underlying asset is a good one or not. So you don't know where these properties are, and then when you find out where they are, before you consider whether or not defence housing per se is worthwhile buying, you have to determine whether their property that they're offering you is in an area that has all the growth drivers. If it satisfies all of those growth drivers, then the reassurance of getting a tenant and the refurbishment might well be worth you taking them on board. But remember, it's just another rent guarantee, it's just another scheme of arrangement. You still have to do the work on working out whether that particular area is the area with the growth drivers and whether it's worthwhile buying in there at all. Because if it isn't in a hotspot or a potentially growing area, then all you're going to end up with is a guaranteed tenant. You're not going to get any of the other upsides of investing in property, including growth and good cash flow. Well, time's flying and we do have to take another break, but when we return, we'll answer more of your calls and emails. To have your question answered, simply call us now on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Welcome back to Your Money, Your Call. I'm Margaret Lomas, and it's been a great night with my expert panel, Brad Matthews from ResCom and Ben Kingsley from Empower Wealth. We've run out of time to take more callers, but we do have a viewer email, and it's from Sue, who writes, I have 2 investment properties that are positively geared in Bligh Park, Sydney, and I've recently bought an off-the-plan unit in Wright ACT, which is expected to be completed in 2016. I'm thinking of attending a Renovate for Profit workshop, which is something I have an interest in doing in the future, and I'd love to know your thoughts. We probably won't comment on the off-the-plan unit in Wright, which I'm a little worried about. Renovate for profit workshops. Brad, we touched on this before. What do you think?
Look, I always say if you have the spare time on your hands and you're willing to do those sort of things, Sue, go for it, but don't sign up for anything. Go listen to everything they've got to say, learn from it, and not that I'm a sceptic, but I'm a skeptic. You know, if they're running these workshops, there's an agenda, there's a reason for it.
The profit tends to come from the people running,
Yes.
go to the people running the workshop, doesn't it? Ben?
It does, Margaret. Look, I'm all for paying for expert advice.
Absolutely.
And the big things that I'd be looking for are things around what do I get? What is my takeout? So is my takeout that I've got to sign up for something else, or I'm actually going to get a series of catalogues and documented checklists and flow charts and proven results that are going to come from that. So if someone's offering me some real detailed content, then again, if you're passionate about it and you want to make it a hobby, then good for you.
Brad, you just thought of something else.
No.
Did you? Oh, I thought you indicated to me. Look, Sue, my opinion on these things is if you have a property in a hot market, it's going to go up anyway. And usually if you renovate those properties, those workshops teach you how to renovate them. And very often when you go back and look at the properties you've renovated, with the renovation they went up X amount, without the renovation they went up X amount less the cost of the renovation. If an area is going up, then it's going to go up anyway. If it's not going up, then usually renovation only adds the renovation cost to its value and not a whole lot more, sometimes a little bit more. It's a long, slow way to invest in property as well because it's very hands-on. You've got to do a lot of stuff yourself to save the money. If you're going to retain other people to do it, then it tends to cost you a lot more for the renovations. I don't know, it's up to you. As the panel says, if you've got the time, it's something you're interested in, go for it, but see it as a hobby rather than a really good, solid way to get real wealth under your belt for retirement. Well, that just about does it for us this evening. Now, I'll be in Melbourne next week and Michael Tears will bring the show to you, so be sure to tune in and give him some support. Thanks to my guests, Brad Matthews from Rescom and Ben Kingsley from Empowerwell, who will, of course, be back again very, very soon. Now, thanks also to our callers. This week, the question of the week goes to Chris. Chris, you asked about Mackay, and I'd like to send you a book that will help you to work out what's happening next and where you should be buying. If you could email me on yourmoneyyourcall@destiny.com.au, I'll send you your book. Now, if you are in Melbourne yourself, and clearly almost every caller tonight was in Melbourne, apparently the most livable city, but you know, we won't talk about that. Be sure to get down to the Exhibition Centre this weekend for the fabulous Home Buyer Show. Now, I'm speaking each day at 12:30, and on Saturday, you can join me for celebrations and a cake as we mark the 20th anniversary of my company, Destiny. I'm going to have a lovely big cake there, and I'm going to share it with everyone who would like to come and have a piece with me. Go now to my website, destiny.com.au, to get hold of your free tickets. Just click on the Home Buyer Show logo. And if you're in Perth, you can't miss the Essential Property Education course on the 6th and 7th of September, which I'm conducting for just 24 people. More about that and the dates for courses in all states from my website, destiny.com.au. Thank you for being with us. I will see you again in 2 weeks' time.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.